Everything about Maybe Happy Ending on Broadway makes me feel like I've stumbled into a parallel universe where things are allowed to be good. It's so complex you wonder how they pulled it off. It's so simple you wonder how it works. It's so original it restores your faith in the modern media landscape, even when there's otherwise very little to be optimistic about. And it's so wholeheartedly devoted to raw, unabashed human emotions in a time and culture where earnestness is increasingly seen as cringe, when feelings are disparagingly contrasted with intellect, and where love is reduced to, frankly, some pussy shit. In 2016, Maybe Happy Ending opened in Seoul's Theater District. An original Korean language musical, it took the country's theater world by storm, receiving critical acclaim and several Korean musical awards, and has since been revived in Japan, China, Seoul multiple times, and even an English language production in Atlanta, the first time it was adapted into a foreign language. It took until late 2024 for the musical to premiere in Broadway for the first time, however. There's a lot about Maybe Happy Ending that marks it as different from most Broadway musicals. Firstly, and most obviously, it's a completely original story. The Korean musical, the plot of which was barely changed in its adaptation to English, is not based on a movie or a book or the life of a celebrity or any kind of pre-existing story that audiences could be familiar with. It's also only one act. The only other one-act musicals currently on Broadway, at least as far as I know, are Six, which itself is a very non-traditional musical, and The Last 5 Years, which is getting a limited run. Additionally, it's a very small cast. It consists entirely of 4 actors, and 3 of them play only one character. Lastly, this musical doesn't have what I would consider a traditional Broadway score. It's not a sung-through musical a la Hamilton or Hadestown, where every song flows right into the next with no scenes of dialogue in between, but it does have 24 songs packed into only an hour and 40 minutes. And while I'll save most of this discussion for later, right now I'll just say the score stands out from the more typical bombastic Broadway soundtrack. There's no song that's clearly trying to be a hit single or a show-stopping 11 o'clock number, or even just a catchy earworm. It definitely feels like the composer and lyricist wrote the songs to convey the story that they had in mind, rather than a story manufactured as a delivery device for songs that they had already written. Speaking of, let's talk about that story. I know not everyone can drop everything and go see this musical on Broadway right now, but if you can afford to, you should, and you should go in without knowing too much about it. But I also have a lot to say about the show's themes, which are impossible to discuss fully without getting into the plot and the ending. So I'm going to give a broad overview of the plot first, and then keep spoilers to one section closer to the end of the video. In the year 2064, people are assisted by helper bots, realistic human-like robots who can do normal household tasks for you. As new models are released, the old, retired helper bots are sent to spend out the remainder of their days in simple living facilities. But these bots have a shelf life, and after a few years to a couple of decades at most, they will break down forever. One such bot is Oliver, who has been residing in a single room in the helper bot retirement yards for over 12 years, patiently waiting for his owner, or friend as he refers to him, to come and pick him back up and take him home. But despite his clear disappointment that his owner James hasn't come back yet, he's pretty happy listening to jazz music, people watching from his window, and taking care of his plant/only friend, Hwabun. His pleasant and peaceful existence is interrupted one day when Claire, a later edition helper bot, knocks on his door to borrow his charger as she's about to run out of battery and power down. Oliver hesitantly agrees to help her and loans her his charger, and she eventually discovers that he has been collecting coins to save for a trip to Jeju Island, where his former owner James now lives. Since Claire, as a helper bot 5, can drive, and since she's always wanted to see the fireflies that inhabit Jeju Island, she proposes that they go together, because it just makes sense. The two strangers turned awkward neighbors turned reluctant road trip buddies then set off for Jeju Island. For spoilers' sake, I won't go into much detail on what occurs on their road trip or on Jeju Island, but I will say that Oliver's plan to stay with James doesn't go as planned, and he ends up turning back and returning to Seoul with Claire after the two of them get to finally see the fireflies. By the time they return, they realize that they've developed feelings for each other. Not just developed feelings, but broken their promise to each other to not fall in love. The two acknowledge that this is a terrible idea, that their relationship has no precedence, that love itself is irrational and doomed not to last. Before they inevitably fall out of love, though, they decide they may as well enjoy a couple days, or maybe weeks, of each other's company, blissfully in love, like humans do. But when Claire, as a less durable model of helper bot, starts to break down, the two are forced to confront the fact that one of them is going to outlast the other. They have maybe a few years left of life. If they don't find a way to break off their relationship before then, time will do it for them. So they decide to stop being in love and walk away. But their memories of each other keep paining them. The thing is, though, as computers, there's one thing they can do that humans can't. They can delete their memories of each other and revert back to a save file from before they ever met. Do they do it? My biggest worry going into any unfamiliar musical is that I won't like most of the songs. Disliking the songs is a really bad headspace to be in when you're watching a musical because it can make you dread every time a new song comes up in the soundtrack. Worse, if you get bored, you might completely zone out during a number, missing what should be, in any musical worth its salt, a host of character and plot information, emotional beats, and/or themes. As previously mentioned, and as many reviews also emphasize, Maybe Happy Ending's score is a divergence from most musicals on Broadway right now. There's two main components to it. One is the actual non-diegetic songs sung by the characters, ones that describe the action of the story and the emotions of the characters, what you'd usually think of when you imagine a number from a musical. But the main character is also a huge jazz fan, just like his old owner. So the other songs are jazz songs sung by a fictional 20th century artist named Gil Brently. Sometimes Oliver goes over to his record player and actually puts the songs on. Other times, Gil Brently himself, played by the actor Des Duran, appears on stage to serenade the audience with a song from his catalog, loosely applicable to the current scene, usually a love song. The strange thing about this score is that I didn't fall in love with any of the songs right off the bat, or get any stuck in my head, at least not the first time I saw it. But this didn't work out against the musical at all. I did not have the problem of getting bored during musical numbers or wishing we could just move past them to get to the next plot-relevant scene. The music of this production is captivating. It transitions so beautifully from one number to the next that you barely notice the characters have gone from singing to speaking or vice versa. Nor do you always notice when one song has ended and another has started, because they all have a coherent sound that makes them blend together seamlessly. This doesn't mean that the soundtrack is repetitive, however. Songs range from being tranquil and thought-provoking, to bubbly and cheerful, to jazzy and romantic, but always consistent with the tone of the moment. The in-universe jazz songs that Oliver listens to in his record player flow perfectly with the more traditional, non-diegetic musical theater numbers that move the plot forward. The soundtrack is a cohesive entity, as opposed to a set list of songs with non-singing scenes in between. To listen to the soundtrack is to experience the musical, maybe not for all of the intricacies of the plot, or its humor, or its clever staging, or all the other elements that I'll go into later, but it is basically the same emotional experience. The soundtrack may not always convey the entire plot of the musical, as is usually the case in a sung-through musical, but by listening to it, you would experience the same emotional journey that one does by watching the stage show. Sure, you could say that the lack of catchier, broader songs deprives the production of having an iconic 11 o'clock number, maybe one that could have been used to advertise the show, but I don't think the soundtrack is unsatisfying for its lack of huge set-piece numbers. It actually manages to be quite impactful and even shocking because the audience is emotionally invested in the characters singing. In short, the soundtrack succeeds because it's perfectly crafted to deliver a story that works. And it's not a very complicated story, so it can be a simple collection of beautiful songs. Another remarkable thing about Maybe Happy Ending is not only does it fit 24 songs into a single act, but these songs are performed by only 4 actors, most of them by only 2, and without an act break to recover. In fact, there's really only a couple of minutes-long stretches where Claire or Oliver aren't on stage. This is an intense musical to perform. I have no experience in singing, but I can't imagine that this is easy on a person's lungs or energy levels. And I think that that's the perfect segue into the next section, the performances. So obviously, this show first came onto my radar for one reason and one reason alone: Darren Criss. Late last year, I started hearing about this new musical on Broadway starring Darren Criss, with great early reviews. I'm obviously a Darren fan for reasons that you'd know if you watched my video on the guy who didn't like musicals, and I'd never seen him live. I mean, I tried to see him off Broadway when he played Seymour in Little Shop, but I'd have to pay like $300 if I didn't want to watch from behind a pole. So yeah, of course I was gonna go see this new show that I knew nothing about called Maybe Happy Ending. I acknowledge that this makes me a bad Broadway fan. Theater fans are supposed to be invested in new shows because they want to support original theater. They're also supposed to geek out over composers or the lyricists, and maybe an actor if that actor is like a certified legend of the stage, not just a guy that they recognize from the funny Harry Potter parodies. Many Broadway purists argue that stunt casting is ruining Broadway by prioritizing star power over talent, while stands of some musicals have been called out for entitled behavior, ranging from expecting all actors to stage door to getting angry over being an understudy instead of their favorite star. Now, I don't think that Maybe Happy Ending is an example of stunt casting, nor would I have been personally mad at Darren if he had, caught the flu the night of my show, but it is true that I would not have seen this musical if not for him. Other than that, I really had zero expectations and even avoided learning the plot of the show just to go in as spoiler-free as possible. As long as I got a good fill of Darren content, I would leave satisfied. Now, the first thing that bears mentioning regarding the performances is that Darren is fantastic and steals the whole thing. Really a Darren-centric show. The show properly starts and is basically 5 to 10 minutes of him doing physical comedy and a soliloquy in a robotic cadence. Oliver moves somewhere between a real-life robot and a human being. His joints are technically capable of moving as freely as ours, but since he seems to follow the same routines day after day with almost zero variation until Claire arrives, his movements seem rote and barely vary. When Claire does knock on his door and shake up his routine, he's visibly shaken, and his gestures go from repetitive yet smooth to awkward and clunky. When it comes to his dialogue and Darren's line delivery, I'll admit, at first I was scared. It's really reminiscent of Jim Parsons in The Big Bang Theory, from his physical mannerisms to the way that he gleefully monologues about his areas of interest, to how he expresses distress at having another person in his space, to his antisocial tendencies that vary from making him seem overtly rude to simply awkward and unaware.
What's with you? Nothing. It's not suspicious that I'm fixating. It's consistent with my personality.
But after the first couple scenes, I got over that pretty quickly because I realized Oliver is an actual likable character. Dare I even say relatable? He's just unapologetically himself, mostly happy, living alone in his simple quarters, and nervous of change or disruption to his routine. He can rant about his favorite topics for hours, has a compulsive need to correct people, and despite his sometimes rigid and analytical mind, is still a romantic at heart. Not only does he love love songs, he seems very familiar with and enamored by human courting rituals. We see this in the song The Rainy Day We Met, where he and Claire decide that in order to cover up the fact that they're helper bots illegally traveling alone, they need to pose as a human couple on vacation. For someone so skeptical of the idea that robots can fall in love, he certainly had a lot of fun making up a fake backstory for how he and Claire would have done exactly that. And when he and Claire eventually decide to give their relationship a shot, it's he who says,
"They say when you're lovers, you gotta try dancing. So let's give it a try. They say nothing's better than doing nothing together. So let's just stay in bed."
He's just such an endearing and sweet character, and it shouldn't be surprising that someone as enthusiastic and charming as Darren plays him so well. But let's not forget Helen J. Shen and Claire. Even if Darren is the main POV we follow in the show, Claire is in many ways the audience surrogate. She's the voice of reason. Her way of speaking and moving are far less robotic than Oliver's, mainly because she's literally a later model of HelperBot and therefore a bit more advanced. But it could also be because, unlike Oliver, she has completely accepted that her role as an aid to humans is over. She knows she's been retired and in no way misses her owners. Even though Oliver is clearly very intelligent and knowledgeable, she's just an overall more mature and reasoned voice. Her interesting past with her owners is examined via flashbacks. Without spoiling any reveals, she was owned by a very rich woman who eventually married a poorer man that she truly loved. It's their relationship that taught Claire what love is, in fact. But when their marriage fell apart, her owner retired her and sent her to live in the HelperBot retirement home, leaving her with her car and expensive designer clothes to try and make up for the abandonment. This has taught Claire two things. One, that romantic love never works out and brings about only pain, and two, human beings do not care about their HelperBots even if it seems like they do. The first point is the reason why she makes Oliver pinky swear that the two of them will never fall in love for real. The second point obviously puts her at odds with Oliver's insistence that James actually is his friend who never forgot about him and intends to return and bring him home any day now. Claire has the emotional maturity to understand the sadness of Oliver's situation, and once he starts to endear himself to her during their journey to Jeju Island, she really struggles with how to manage his well-being. She's positive that when they find James, he will not be happy to see Oliver again, that he will have changed, and that Oliver will be sent back to Seoul. She asks herself, is it my job to care?
We're getting closer, I smell the salt in the air.
Will he be wounded? And is it my job to care?
Claire is a perfect foil for Oliver. Helen's performance strikes a balance between being annoyed and charmed by his quirks. She can call him out for his social faux pas and rudeness, plays with and teases him without verging into bullying, and, as the two start to become more comfortable with each other, convince the audience that she's actually falling for him. These two characters are so well written and performed that by the time they sing their main love song, When You're in Love, you see how far they've come. You know how these two characters, who were first so opposed to love and relationships and sharing their lives with each other, have arrived at this point. Despite them promising each other not to fall in love, Claire and Oliver rush out of their apartments at the exact same time to profess their feelings for one another. Oliver reaches out his pinky finger and apologetically says, "I couldn't keep the promise." You're at once rooting for them to get together and dreading where the story is going, because you know it can't simply end just like that. Their relationship is the heart of the whole show, so obviously if they can't bring the audience along with them on their journey, the entire emotional payoff will fail. Because this isn't just a story about two robots falling in love. It's about the very choice to fall in love. It's about how love ends. And it's about whether the joy of experiencing love is worth suffering the pain of knowing that you're gonna one day lose it. A question that the show explores and largely leaves up to the audience. So there's one song that appears multiple times in the soundtrack. It opens the musical, an instrumental version comes back later in a pivotal moment, and it's the last song with lyrics in the whole show. It's called Why Love, and it's sung by Gil Brentley, the fictional jazz singer that Oliver listens to. The song asserts,
Love lasts one moment when all things end in goodbye, love.
and it asks,
Love, why did we bother to try, love? Were we brave or were we just naive?
when this song comes back at the very end of the musical, the lyrics aren't any different. The whole song is exactly the same. This is kind of interesting considering it's the end. The entire musical is designed to answer one question: why love? You'd think the show would have some kind of statement, something strong and solid to serve as the official answer to the question. I'm going to try to talk about the ending to the story now, so if you plan on seeing this musical in the near future, you can skip to this timestamp to avoid spoilers. So, where I left the events of this musical, Oliver and Claire had both decided to fall out of love, but were struggling with the fact that, well, you can't really do that. Until they realized they could just delete their memories of each other, sparing themselves the pain of knowing that they love each other but can't be together without suffering the pain of having to say goodbye. In truth, though, Oliver didn't always have the ability to delete his own memories. Most helper bots don't have their own passwords. Claire's owner only gave her her password so that she could delete the memory of why she was retired if she ever wanted to. So Oliver comes to acquire his own password through a character I haven't mentioned yet because his very role in this show is kind of a spoiler. Jun-So is the adult son of James, whom Oliver and Claire met when they arrived in James's home on Jeju Island. He is the one to tell Claire and Oliver that James has died. He actually moved to Jeju Island years ago when he became ill so that his estranged son could take care of him, and he left Oliver behind because Jun-So insisted on it. In Jun-So's own words, it was hard enough without having his perfect fake son around. When Oliver first hears that James has passed, he's sad, but he quickly moves past it and offers to work as Jun-So's helper bot and share the happy memories he has of James. But Jun-So sends him away. He only returns later, once Oliver and Claire are back in the helper bot yards, and says that he's changed his mind and does want to see the memories. So he types Oliver's password in while saying it out loud. The second he does that, everyone in the audience is thinking the same thing. He and Claire both know their passwords now. They could delete their memories of each other. The next scene is the two of them discussing exactly that. They sing the heartbreaking song Maybe Happy Ending about how their story isn't actually a sad one. They claim that choosing to end their relationship and delete all their memories of each other would be the closest thing that they could get to a happy ending. And they say that their love is still valuable even if it ends. In the end, the two of them delete all memories since they met, basically turning their clocks back to a few days before Claire ever knocked on Oliver's door. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like an answer to the question of why love. It sounds like the musical is pretty clearly asserting that we choose to love because it's worth the joy even if it ends in pain, and these robots did the right thing by erasing their memories of each other because their love still lives on, if only in the past. The memories did hurt them more than they comforted them, and thus were not worth keeping. But this is not the last moment of the musical. There's still one more scene. Claire is still breaking down at a scary rate. She's still having issues with her charger, so she does what she did the last time. She runs over to her neighbor's house and knocks on their door. Oliver is meanwhile absorbed in his normal daily routine just as he had been before he ever met Claire, talking to Hua Boon and listening to Gil Brentley. And just as he was at the start of the musical, he's startled by her knock at the door. He lets Claire in and nervously, wordlessly, hands her his charger. Overall, he just seems a little off. Then, as Claire is nonchalantly examining his apartment for her first time, Oliver whispers to Hua Boon, "Shh, don't tell her." What does it mean that one of the two of them has decided to erase her memories of their relationship while the other has decided to keep his? Why would Oliver, the robot with more of his lifespan left and who is therefore going to outlive Claire, decide to keep these memories when they're sure to pain him after she's gone? Why does Claire, on the other hand, decide to live out the remainder of her days in ignorance when she could have had the comfort of Oliver's company up until her final moments? The answer, of course, lies with these robots' relationships with humans. Claire learned from her former owner that love usually ends in heartbreak, and she and Oliver are lucky that their relationship went as well as it did. Her best option seemed to be ending the relationship on a note of love to the point where even the memories are perfectly preserved in the past. But Oliver loved his former owner, James, and James genuinely cared for him and only left him behind in the Helperbot yards because his son insisted on it. Then, after Junso had first rebuffed Oliver's wish to share his memories of James, seemingly because it would be too painful to reflect on them, he came to regret this decision. He taught Oliver that memories of a loved one do hold value long after that person is gone. So now we're left with these two characters, together once again in a little apartment, one knowing what is about to unfold and the other blissfully unaware, but both having to deal with the knowledge that their time is running out. Neither character is condemned for their final choice, nor is the show firm on what exactly is going to happen to these characters. Maybe they'll fall in love all over again. Maybe Oliver will tell Claire the truth. Maybe they'll go their separate ways. The final note of the musical is Claire asking Oliver, "Do you think it will be okay?" And him replying, "I hope so."
They only live for 2 months. But what a beautiful 2 months.
As much as this musical is about love, it's also about grief, but it's entirely devoted to the preparation for it. Oliver and Claire have the privilege and the burden of knowing that their endings are imminent, so they get/have to decide how to deal with that. And while the show is in many ways very ambiguous in how it both ends and what the ending implies about its themes, it's pretty firmly in favor of choosing love. Maybe that's not surprising. Most love stories tend to be pretty pro-love, that just kind of comes with the genre. But it's especially interesting in a story like this, where the main couple's love is always associated with grief right from the get-go. Claire makes Oliver promise not to fall in love with her because she's positive it will end poorly. The two of them try their best to fall out of love because they know it's a bad idea. While they're dating, they know that their relationship will be short-lived because they're retired robots nearing the ends of their lives, and keep prolonging their relationship by proposing just one more day.
So now, should we end it?
I'm ready if you are. Maybe just one more day.
Their relationship is constantly haunted by the threat of it ending at any given moment. Yet it's also such a sweet, cute story. During their time together, they have so many treasured moments, mostly shown via montage, where they manage to find happiness in each other's company. Even if the show lets the audience make many of their own judgments on what decision they would make in Oliver and Claire's shoes, the very story seems to corroborate the assertion made in the musical's titular song. The ending's not the most important part. One of my other favorite musicals of all time is Hadestown. If you in any way keep up with Broadway, you're probably familiar with it, and if not, maybe you know the ancient Greek myth it's based on, the tragic love story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And yes, this musical is a tragedy, a fact divulged in the opening number.
It's a sad song. It's a sad song. It's a sad tale. It's a tragedy. It's a sad song. It's a sad song. Sing it anyway.
But I hesitate to say that it lacks a happy ending. If you've seen the show, you know the actual last moment of the musical. The point where the clock turns back and we replay the first moment that Orpheus and Eurydice meet, while the narrator vows to keep telling the story again and again and again, even though it may never end any differently. The parallels between the two musicals' endings are not lost on me, and it makes me want to call Maybe Happy Ending a tragedy, but also kind of a miracle. A miracle that these two robots ever met, a miracle that they got to share the time together that they did, a miracle that this show was ever made, a miracle that I, just looking to get a fill of Darren Criss content, stumbled upon it. There's something terrifying to me about theater, something that makes me uneasy. It's so real, you see the actors right in front of you, barely separated by space and not at all by time, meaning that they, whose job it is to pretend you don't exist, could look you in the face and express recognition in their eyes. Sometimes they do meet your gaze, and in those moments, I always find myself feeling self-conscious and looking away. Even though I know the actor isn't actually looking at me specifically, just in the general direction, it feels like they are, and that's too intense. It reminds me that they're real people, right in front of me, who can see us as we watch them. But at the same time, theater is so impermanent. Every moment that you spend in a theater seat, every sound you hear from the orchestra, every reaction from the audience, every microfacial expression in an actor's face, every emotion that you feel for the first time as you watch the story unfold in front of you, will from that point forward exist in your memory alone. You can't record, you can't rewind, you can't rewatch. Even if you go back to see the same show again, you won't actually be returning to the same show. Every time the curtains rise and fall, you are experiencing something that will only exist for you. You, in your seat, your unique view of the stage, your particular audience, on that particular day at that particular time. These facts will never and can never reconvene. So when you take yourself to see any show live, you're not only challenging yourself to have an experience so meaningful and valuable that it's worth the time and money and effort that you spent to get yourself there, you're also taunting yourself with the fact that if it is a truly precious experience, you'll never get to have it again. When I'm in a theater, I try my absolute best to soak in every aspect of the show, to concentrate on the details and just altogether value the experience. I tell myself, soon you'll be reflecting on this moment and wishing that you could experience this again, so enjoy it now. But sometimes I'm so stuck on the fact that it actually distracts me from the show that's unfolding in front of my eyes. When where I am hits me in the middle of a show, by the time I've reaffirmed my intent to concentrate and make the most of it, oops, I've missed half a scene. I can't really enjoy the experience fully because I'm so scared of it inevitably ending. I've seen this show twice now, both in pretty cheap seats, and I'm planning on seeing it again a third time. This time, I'm going to be in the second row center. I know this is a crazy expense coming from money that should be going into my savings, but I also know that for me, this experience will be worth it. Darren Criss will be leaving the show soon, and even though I'd love to see a version of this with any actor in its lead role, maybe even be intrigued in how they play Oliver differently, I will always treasure Darren's performance. He will always be the voice who first spoke the words, "I couldn't keep the promise," and broke my heart while simultaneously mending it. This time, though, I'm not going to panic that each moment is fleeting. I'm not going to worry so much about remembering every detail that I'm too tense to let the emotions wash over me. If Darren looks in my direction and my gaze catches his, I'm not going to look away to spare myself a few seconds of self-consciousness. I'm going to let myself feel. And even if I don't remember every single detail of the experience, I will remember that feeling.
If you can't find it,